I think that in 2026, relevance is still key for SEO, and AI is an incredible tool for scale, but it's a terrible tool for empathy. So my recommendation is use AI to build your foundation, to handle your drafts, your speed, but use human cultural insights to win the market. Don't just aim to be readable in a new language, aim to be trustworthy. And I believe that's where you will stand out from the competition. I'm Silvi Nuñez, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights.
Silvi, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
So in an AI-heavy world where content feels so generic, localized and culturally aware content becomes a powerful SEO strategy in this 2026.
Okay, wow. So what is localized and culturally aware content?
Okay, so especially now in 2026, we have an infinite amount of good enough content, but good enough doesn't really rank anymore because search engines have evolved and they now they reward relevance, depth, engagement. And talking to people in their language is a huge part of that. A while back, having your website in English and maybe one other language, that works, company sold. But today, people expect brands that really talk to them. If you don't, they'll just close your site and move on to the next one. And it's not just about talking to people in their language, but taking their context into account as well. And this is kind of where the difference between translation and localization comes. Basically, when you translate, what you do is you make content available in a new language so that people can read it, right? But when you localize, you make the content relevant to a new culture, to a new context, so that people can actually trust it. And if you allow me, I would love to give an example because sometimes it's a little bit confusing. These terms are oftentimes used interchangeably. I do it all the time. So for example, let's say that a US-based e-commerce store, they want to reach Spanish-speaking audiences, right? That live in the US. So people who speak Spanish and who live in the US. We have same market, same buying habit. We have same delivery expectations, pricing, currencies, and so on. So language access would be the main barrier. And in this case, translation of English into Spanish works, Now, let's say that this same e-commerce store, so it's a US-based e-commerce brand, they want to expand from the US into Spain. Now, here we have a different buying behavior because, for example, in Spain, people typically tend to do more research than in the US. Trust signals matter more. Keywords change because people talk different, they search different, they have different intent. An example that I love is, for example, say that someone in the US wants to buy a security camera. They probably do it for convenience. For example, to see if a package arrived in their home. Now, in Spain, if a person wants to buy a security camera, perhaps it's because there is a lot of illegal occupation in Spain, which is called ocupas. So rather than doing it for convenience, they're doing it for protection. There's a different intent. So if your SEO content only focuses on convenience, then you've actually missed the cultural why of the Spanish market. Additionally, tone must feel local. For example, localizing a Thanksgiving campaign for Spain wouldn't make any sense because Thanksgiving is not really celebrated in Spain. And shipping, return methods, they all need to be adapted. So basically, in this case, translation would not be enough. You need to localize language. You need to localize the user experience, the trust signals, and so on. So to summarize it, translation makes the content understandable. It makes your product accessible for a new audience, but localization makes it believable. It makes people trust in it.
Okay, so how do you make your content as believable as possible with really effective localization? Is it essential to have someone with their boots on the ground in the country itself that you want to operate in?
Yeah, definitely. Ideally, you always want to work with people who live in the country and who are exposed, to what's going on, the news, the culture, the terminology that's used there. So yeah, ideally, you always want to work with native people. And this is where a lot of companies fail, because I've seen a lot of companies, they just take the bilingual guy from the office and they're like, hey, can you make this content available in a new language? And that guy, perhaps he's not exposed, he or she's not exposed to the culture, or perhaps they're not linguists, so they don't really make linguistically correct content, or perhaps they're busy with their tasks, they don't really have time for your project. So a lot of time the projects end up halfway through or with a lot of inconsistencies. So yeah, definitely try to always work with an expert, with a professional from the country you want to target.
How do you know when it's worth your while just to do translations to begin with? Because obviously it's very easy to do translations nowadays. You can do them mostly with AI and perhaps edit them a little bit afterwards, then get them up there as quickly as possible. But how do you know, how does a brand know when that's not enough and you have to do the localization before you hit publish?
Okay, so here I would like to make a note. I am not against AI. I actually embrace it. I love it. And I think that it has a lot of that you can use it for a lot of tasks in the translation localization world. But you have to be smart about it. Some of the content can be translated even by just an AI workflow, but you have to kind of prioritize what content you will use with that workflow. For example, user generated content that has low search volume, that's not really very important. Perhaps you can do some tests with AI for that kind of content. To determine what content requires localization, it's all about doing some research. Perhaps you can work with someone who can walk you through, tell you what can work, what cannot work in the new target market. It's also very important to do research early on before starting your localization process and to kind of like filter your content, put out like parameters or priorities on what kind of content should be handled in which way. And as always, this is always a test. So test, see how it works, see what kind of results it gets, and then continue.
And how do you measure the impact of being more culturally aware of and incorporating culturally elements within your content?
I believe this would depend a lot on how you actually measure this in your target language, in your English version, for example, or in your source version. But for example, organic traffic by country or by language, this is the starting point. Also, you can measure engagement metrics, like how much the user is spending on the page or how depth, like the scroll depth. If these metrics increase after you localize a page, then it's a signal that the content is resonating locally. Also, conversion rates per language, per market. So a successful localization strategy should see, higher clicks on the target market. And also, I think that local backlinks, local mentions, if local sites start citing your content, it's because you've provided something of value to their community.
And what would you say to a brand that is struggling to justify spending too much money on localization, on culturally aware content? Is it okay to, again, just translate and get it published to begin with and then adapt the content towards the end?
I'm always in favor of doing tests. So this is often actually a very common issue. It's very difficult to justify localization budgets because the truth is localization is expensive. It requires tools, it requires working with professionals. Companies that usually embrace localization have a lot of content that requires processing. So perhaps rather than, many times companies come and they're like, oh, I want to expand into 10 languages. Rather than doing things big, start small. Start with one language. Rather than doing the full website, start with the most important websites, test, see what kind of results it gets, results and then continue with the other languages or with the rest of the content. And you could try different workflows. For example, you could try a localization workflow in some of your pages. You could try an AI workflow in other pages, and then compare and see what kind of results it gets. Something that I believe it's important to keep in mind is that AI tools, they lack content, they have errors, they don't understand your brand. So if you embrace AI, you will have to, accept the fact that if there are errors on the content, people will associate these errors with your brands. Something that you could also do is if you use AI, you could be open about it, like tell your audience the content you're about to read is machine translated. And this way you kind of separate from any bad reputation that the content could give you. But I believe it's all about testing and see what works better for you.
And you also talk about how localization and becoming more culturally aware in your content can actually be a powerful SEO strategy. So why is it a powerful SEO strategy?
SEO basically is about bringing people to your website, but that's half of the job. You have to make people stay, you have to make people choose your product. And I believe that's where localization comes. It's what ensures that the traffic that you worked so hard to get actually stays and buys. And, as marketers, our goal is to try to remove any friction, anything that will make your user stop and think, should I buy this? Should not? Should I perhaps leave it for a later time? And I think that localization is a great tool to kind of remove that friction. So I believe that's the role of localization in SEO.
Lovely. Okay. And how does this get integrated into an overarching SEO strategy? Is this something that needs to be discussed maybe once a quarter, or as part of actually deciding a global content plan, or how would you go about doing it?
It depends on what kind of budget you have for this. Many companies, what they do is they allocate a budget at the beginning of the year. And then by mid-year, for example, they review the results and see whether or not they continue investing on this. So that is one way to do it. Yeah, I think that the idea is to kind of prepare a plan, prepare a strategy, set some goals, and then start small and, start putting it out there and then define what the next steps will be.
And have you any thoughts on how evolving technologies or the way that SEO is continuing to change localization, and what will happen over the coming year or so in terms of strategy in order to deal with that?
I think that AI is doing a better job each day, not only in terms of like the content it's generating, but also in the local nuances. It's pretty good at when you say, hey, talking in Spanish for Spain, talking English for UK or for the US, it's doing a pretty decent job on that. So I think it will continue evolving, but I don't think we are there yet. In any case, I believe implementing AI tools nowadays, they can be implemented in various parts of the localization workflows. And I believe that it will get better as we move on. And in terms of SEO, I think it's great for generating content, for asking for ideas, but I still feel that we need a person with actual SEO knowledge involved in the process to continue optimizing, to continue, implementing best practices, the traditional SEO best practices, like inserting keywords in certain places, like creating backlink strategies and so on. I think that still we need an expert in the process for now. But I believe that in the future, it's going to be amazing. I can't wait for it.
You mentioned keywords there as well. So is that still a very important part of it? Because obviously you can't necessarily directly translate keywords and come up with a phrase that a local market is likely to use.
Yeah, undoubtedly. So very basic example, for example, if you wanted to buy a pair of shoes in the United States, of running shoes, you would look for something like, well, running shoes
or sneakers.
Or sneakers. And in the UK, perhaps trainers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So finding out these differences, this is still done through keyword research. So keyword research is still a very important part of the process, even though, like search engines are doing an amazing job in finding similar phrasing, but still simply translating keywords is not enough. You have to take psychological aspects into consideration, intent, the way people search. So I think it's still part of the process.
So what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
I think that in 2026, relevance is still key for SEO, and AI is an incredible tool for scale, but it's a terrible tool for empathy. So my recommendation is use AI to build your foundation, to handle your drafts, your speed, but use human cultural insights to win the market. Don't just aim to be readable in a new language, aim to be trustworthy. And I believe that's where you will stand out from the competition.
Silvi Nuñez is co-founder at Optimational. Find out more over at optimational.com. Silvi, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.